Welcome to the Crafty View. I'm Diane Williams, the host for this show, and this show is produced by the Craftsmen's Guild of Mississippi. And this is all about celebrating our great craftspeople from around the region. Today, I'd like to talk about someone very special, and then I'll show you some of his images. This is a tribute to George Berry Sr., the woodcarver. He is a master woodcarver. He died in 2014 from lung cancer. He was 76 years old, but he was one of the last living members of the Craftsmen's Guild of Mississippi. And actually, he mentored me. I learned how to set up my booth, how to nurture and hold on to customers that would last for years and years. George Berry had a way about himself. He formed relationships and friendships with people. And I was just fascinated with how when there was a festival or an event, we would have our booth set up, and there was George Berry talking to an elder gentleman who had his adult son with him, who had his child with him, 3 generations. And George Berry did that all over the state. He is the 2001 recipient of the Governor's Arts for Excellence Award from the Mississippi Arts Commission. George Berry is listed on the Mississippi Arts Commission's Mississippi Folklife website. And there is a gallery room at the Craft Center that is dedicated to George Berry. It actually bears his name, and there's an image of him outside. And this is at the Craft Center on 950 Rice Road in Ridgeland, Mississippi. George Berry has taught children and adults, men and women, how to wood carve. And you always used a little knife. But I was fascinated that he could take a plastic butter knife and teach a child how to carve a bar of ivory soap. That's how I learned to do a little bit of carving. I won't say I really learned, but I had an experience with George Berry. And how did he come up with his images? Well, I'll tell you. He could look at an image from a printed material, a magazine, but he also went out and looked at images in nature, animals and different figures, dogs, horses, buffalo, those sorts of things. And he never actually took a tape measure or a ruler to do his measuring, but he would study his subject and he was focused on their proportions. Oh my goodness. When he carved a bass fish, he would do that, and the bass fish would be made of basswood and he would stain it with walnut stain. Now, he only used a pocket knife. 90%, 98%, I would say almost 100% of his work was carved with a pocket knife. And then 2% of his work was done with a saw because he had to cut the wood to a certain proportion before he could start carving with the knife. And as I said, he got his ideas from pictures and from real life. How long did he work on a piece? Because that's what everybody wants to know. How long does it take you to create your work? Well, George could work on a piece from 3 weeks to 3 months. And sometimes he would spend a year working on a design. And he could work on more than one design at a time. He would work on something and maybe lay it down and think about it a little bit more, and then come back to it after working on something else. The more he practiced, the more evolved he became, the better he became at what he did, the more expert he became. I loved listening to how George talked about his work. He carved a pelican one time, and he said he loved the big head of the pelican. It was so funny. Now, for those of you that do wood carving, George used a short 1-inch blade and a shaft. He used a shaft so that he could do his beveling. And he worked with several knives at one time. He would have them laid out and he would switch up as needed. I guess they had different levels of sharpness, or they were fitted a certain way. I was most fascinated with the fact that George created a continuous chain. You ever seen a chain, how it interlocks with itself? Well, George carved one of those, and I actually own two of them. When he carved animals, the animals he carved were mostly indigenous or known as animals you would find here in Mississippi, mostly. He lived in Ridgeland, Mississippi, which is, I guess, south of Jackson, down Highway 49, somewhere in that area. He learned his trade from his father. At the age of 7, he would watch his father as he would get off from work, and he would sit down and start whittling away. George left Oklahoma in 1972 to become an industrial art instructor at the Pineywood School. He has won numerous awards and recognitions. He was chosen to be featured to demonstrate wood carving, and he represented Mississippi at the World's Fair. I'm not sure when that was. It might have been in the early 80s. He was featured in Craft in America. That was a book by Phyllis George. And he was also featured in Southern Living and on the cover of the South Central Bell telephone book. He used his hands and a knife the old-fashioned way. And he has demonstrated in schools, museums, and festivals all over the region. And he slowed down after he got cancer. And I remember George, what he would do, his hands, he was in his 70s. I think he was 76 when he passed away. As he was getting older, his hands were not able to do what he had always done. His hands were not able to whittle the wood. And so the wood was becoming a little, I don't know if he had arthritis or not. But what George Berry did, he started working with pewter. I think it was pewter. It was a soft metal, and that was easier for him to carve. I thought I had a piece that I could show you, and I know I had 1 or 2 of his pewter pieces, but I couldn't find them. But hold on, because I've talked enough. We are going to take a look at some of George Berry's work. Are you ready?